Colleagues, good afternoon. I'm hoping that you won't fall asleep during this presentation, and I hope it will enjoy what I'm going to say. I unfortunately am a consumer scientist. You're looking at one. And what I'm going to talk about might not be very new to my colleagues in front of me here, but I hope it sheds some light on the consumer thinking and what we can do in that field of research. Now, my topic is quite loaded, and we can look from an understanding of the consumer. What are we looking at when we look at that point from the consumer side? What happens with the consumer in store when he makes food choices? And I hope you'll find this very relevant, especially for retail. Factors that influence food choice was actually my assignment. I'm going to touch roughly on those. And how does food choice become a decision-making process that the consumer is involved in? We're going to look at all the understanding the consumer has of food choice, healthy food choices, and then the implication of those choices. We're going to look at the impact consumer psychology has made in this field, and that is quite valuable. We propose a change in the environment for food choices, and we look just briefly at the cost of these healthy choices, understanding consumers' acceptance of all of what is happening around them and making those healthier options and choices that they see, and can we really predict consumer behavior, which I will leave you with. Now, when we look at the consumer and trying to understand what the consumer is understanding, that always sounds so double-barreled to me, but it's the truth. We're looking really at what they think, their thoughts, their sense they make of something that is around them, the ideas they have. We view through their eyes, and that is quite important. So we see it from their side, and sometimes we forget the importance of this element in whatever we plan. But very exciting are the associations consumers have of certain products and certain elements that we don't always know, and their experiences of these products and problems that they face become very valuable. This gives us the right to make those interpretations and deductions from what the consumer understands to better inform, if we can say it in that way. And I'd like to quote Pam at this moment in time, who wrote in his editorial note in the Journal of Consumer Psychology that when companies and policymakers want to understand the consumer, they really want to know what's going on in their mind. And that is the part of the research that I enjoy the most. If we place the consumer within food choice, we know that the choice is what they will select. And one of the books, and you're very quiet, so it must be interesting. One of the books that I've picked up lately is Consumerology by Philip Graves. And it's a nice bed reading side book you can enjoy. And this says to us, when we present these choices to the consumer, it becomes mind-boggling. And too many choices that we always think is the best is not really the best. Because if you've seen consumers leave a store, it's because sometimes that selection is just too big. And the consumer becomes confused and they can't cope with so many options. A smaller number of options gives them that direct product that fits their needs immediately. And that is why we sometimes see that consumers can't make the choice. Now, how do they rationalize this? They say that there's nothing really that suits me at this point in time, but there's a whole shelf full of deodorants. And it's especially in that category of men's deodorants that are all black that they have the problem also. So one option amongst a smaller number of options is actually more valuable to the consumer. And it's that trick to make the balance between what I have to choose and actually being able to manage that choice, that is what we've got to look at. So it can become very confusing to this consumer. We know that the categories of the factors that broadly influence food choice, and we've had some of them this morning, can be patterned into those that I've listed. They're biological, they're economic, they are physical, they're social, psychological, and some researchers do like to put attitudes, belief, knowledge, all in the psychological field. And these are really very well researched. The factors that influence food choice, the abundance of literature and research around this topic is really, you can't go through all of it. But the question now is, if all of this is existing out of, from the research and the researchers that are conducting this research, shouldn't we also be asking the consumer about what they think about what they're eating? I think we sometimes leave that out. And it's a specific question that the European Food Information Council has also posed if you go onto their website and you read about food choices and these categories. It's interesting that the body of knowledge around food factors that influence consumers' food choice is cutting across the globe. And I've pulled out some of the studies to show you it doesn't really matter now who we ask, where we ask, what country, what age group, we're getting the same responses. And I'll show you just now, in the slides to follow, what healthy food choices are to the consumer and how that is cutting across the globe. So the answers are there. We've now just got to implement those suggestions coming from the consumer. If we look at Carrillo's study on the Spanish consumer, and there they basically used the food choice questionnaire from Steptoe to determine what factors influence food choice for those consumers. And they said sensory appeal, and we've touched on that today, and price was also mentioned, and convenience. Then when we moved to a younger population, where Swanson used the Appalachian youth in America, they found the same thing from a qualitative point of view, and some extras. But these are just snippets from the trend in a lot of these studies focusing on food choice. What is nice, particularly to South Africa's context, is Pretorius and Sleva, who've shown us that from a South Soweto point of view, from consumers there, socioeconomic circumstances as well as urbanization, and that's been mentioned as well as food insecurity, some of the critical factors that are influencing food choices. And we've touched upon urbanization that's created a different diet for our consumers in those areas, and this is very nice to see. But lately, psychology hasn't stood back at all, and again, mood studies affecting food choice are some of the research that's coming out. And what I like about Gardner's study is that they've actually taken the position of, so if mood changes, if I've got negative and positive mood, does that make me indulge in different types of food? And what they found is that the negative mood, yes, we have an inclination to indulge in foods that are immediate mood repair type of foods. So those are the indulgence, the chocolates. We know that by now. But what they've pointed out differently is that that's very short-lived. It's for now. It's a repair at that moment, where a positive mood is actually having the consumer inclined to a healthier option that's more sustained and long life. It's for better, healthier lifestyle. So health and well-being becomes the issue there, which is the longer period we want to engage with, which is quite nice in that area of research. Other factors that I'm going to add that aren't always on these lists are the labels and the importance of this in creating the food choice. And this research is also in abundance. You can go all over the globe and you'll find studies on food labeling, and our study in particular used food labels and asked the Gauteng consumers whether they use these food labels, and is there a relationship between health awareness, healthy lifestyles, and we found that that relationship does exist. And that says to us labeling has an impact on our choice for that healthy living. And Barrero Hurl also pointed that out in his study. Nutrition labels do have that effect on healthy food choices. What I like about Dani and Gupta is that if you ever want a shortcut to what has been happening in the label research, you read their article. I must say they quoted us, that's very nice. But what they've shown us is that the perceived usefulness of those labels are very important when it comes to healthy choices. And that is started when the consumer has a good understanding of the information, and when they are reading labels and they're gathering information, it helps that understanding, which then relates back to that healthy option that they select. And this is what they've come up with, that it's part of our decision-making process in the end. If we can gain the knowledge, understand what we're interpreting in those labels, and if we can create a better context for the consumer to understand the information, this is where it will end up with in a healthier food choice. And what they also point out is when the consumer doesn't always understand what is happening, they're going the short route of cost and benefit. Whatever they can pick might be time-related. They haven't got the time to stand there for a long while and make sense of what they're reading. So they either leave the product and it doesn't end up in a healthy choice. But if they understand and they can interpret that information, it will be part of that healthy option. Now, I'm touching quickly on the global perspective, just to give you an idea that what the consumer understands about healthy food choices is the same all over, and it doesn't matter if you point them to a cereal bar or fast foods. The red elements show you that they come up with the same things: low sugar, low fat, vegetables, fruit. Those kinds of things are sticking in the consumer's mind in any context. What is healthy food choices? They contain these things. And then if you look at the AC Nielsen study, it says the same thing, which was more broader, globally done. So there is a trend that is all over. So if we now still want to ask, so what does the consumer think is healthy? I don't know what the answer is going to be because it's already said. And we must now capitalize on those answers and try to reproduce what we are doing for the consumer. Now, unfortunately, if we think we can convince the consumer that a healthy lifestyle or healthy food choices is a better option, I was quite shocked when I understood from this article that the consumer now actually feels threatened in some instances. And this was a study done on African American food choice, where healthier options was considered to actually be a threat to their cultural inheritance. And I never imagined that. I didn't think it exists, and that they were now suppressed by another body who says you've got to eat healthy. And we've got to keep these things in mind because they do exist. We aren't all alike. And what we think might be good for one might not be as good for the other. And it's just something to nibble on. But what we also know are these things, that if you bring the consumer to health, and that word is loaded, then they immediately say poor taste, high price, smaller portions. I struggle to see where those products are, and I think we also heard that. So the consumer is giving us vital information to how they perceive and how they experience what is out there in terms of health and food choices. Now, what has consumer psychology been trying to do? Apart from the fact that they've really started, and if you read Pam's 6 sins of consumer psychology, you'll see that laboratory is not always the answer, but to attend to more useful aspects that are needed. And one researcher that has really done major work in this field is Van Sink and his colleagues. And they, from the Cornell University, have really looked at all aspects of what is creating this impact on the consumer. Why are they overeating? What is happening to portion size? And I'm so glad that the advocacy is also to look at portion size, because food choices, we already have a lot on that. But obesity doesn't stand on food choice alone. It's on portion size, which we've heard. And their research has pointed out that this is a very important element. And most of their intervention programs have gone around trying to get the portion sizes as something to stick in the consumer's mind. And they have 3 drivers that they've understood in terms of the quantity of food consumed. But those drivers also drive food choice. They are the same. And the interesting one is that the normative cues are actually interference cues that drive overconsumption. And mainly the consumer is not always sure how much they're consuming. It's blanketed to them in many options that they are choosing from. And the normative cues has brought around the health hellos. Now I want to share this with you because this is an impact the consumer has on his own food choice. When they're adding attributes to products that aren't really that healthy, but they're making them healthy, we've got a problem. And that's sometimes with price or the brand. They're making it out to be healthy and not perhaps reading the label. So they've also already got that association with that product. But then you also get the health horns. And that is where the consumers actually given negative elements to the products. And the sorry state of it is that the consumer gives these attributes to the products without actually having the knowledge behind it to make those deductions. And that is the sadness. And that's where our education and information has to start. Now, they propose that the environment has to change in which the consumer makes their choices. And interesting is you make that environment change at home, and it's not a persuasion to eat healthier. It's what are you doing physically, changing your plate size, changing the dishing up bowls, the size of those elements you use at home that can change the environment. And that is what this is all about. And what we might now be seeing is the nudging effect coming through. And I dare to stick my neck out and say I think Woolworths is doing and applying the nudging effect, because it's changing the environment of the sweets that is always at your checkout points. So this is what marketers and retailers can do to change that environment of food choice. We are going to touch on the health and the cost. I don't need to convince you that there is enough literature around that says the healthy options are sometimes not the cheapest options for the consumer. But what we've got to understand is we've got to teach the consumer to make the healthy option a choice within their budget. And we know that the moderately priced goods, your vegetables and some of your greens and grains, fall in the same price category almost as your high density or high energy foods. And what would the consumer prefer? Definitely not a carrot to a chocolate. And it's that change that has to take place. We get to consumer acceptance of all of this. And I doubt if I can convince you that consumer acceptance happens easily. It doesn't. Consumer acceptance only happens when the consumer knows enough, and that changes the belief and the attitude, and attitude brings around a change. So we have various attitude change models, and we can even propose interventions. And if we think of the reactance theory, acceptance from the consumer doesn't really happen without a real change in that attitude for the positive. And that is what we are looking for if we want to change the behavior and change the choices. Now, what I'm going to share with you, and I'm so glad I was in this audience today, what happens when a consumer is confronted with a new product? What is the consumer going to do? And one of my students worked on pea protein, and I saw on your slides earlier oats protein as well. Now, pea protein is unknown really to the consumer as a protein substitute. And we wanted to know if they saw this product on the shelf, would it make them run? Would it make them stop and think? Will it make them unconditionally purchase that product? Or what is going to happen to the consumer? Because obviously the company doesn't want to lose revenue by putting a product on the market and the consumer doesn't choose that product at all. And that is what we focused on. So we took the concept to the consumer. And interestingly, they wanted certain things about that new product. They wanted certain information. And it was around the health benefits of that product. They said to us, we didn't ask them in a questionnaire, we didn't make them say these things, it was voluntary. And these were in focus groups where they actually said to us, well, if you're going to give me this product and you're going to market it to me, I want to know about the health aspects of it. I want to know about the nutritional value of the product. The affordability of that product is key to me, as well as has it got a sustained energy level. I don't want a hollow product that I chew up now and later it doesn't even make me feel as if I've had anything. Has it got attractive packaging? Is it inviting me to make this an option? And has it got the acceptable taste? Now that we can't deny, it happens all over, and we've heard that a lot. But these were self-generated aspects from those consumers. So this makes you believe that if I market my product and I address these things, I might have a potential market for my product. It's never guaranteed, because I'm from the opinion that behavior cannot be predicted. Behavior is very complicated, and you can almost indicate the intention, but never the pure behavior guaranteed. So this was one of the results of that pea protein study, which was quite interesting to us. But they also said, if you tell me about the eating occasion, I have to use it, and again the health-related vision around that product, it might be more accepted. Now, what I'm going to share with you is almost in a publication, and that's the acceptance of products that the consumer doesn't seem to really be a fay with. And these are our milk alternatives and some of the variants and the use of these items. And this was shocking and alarming to us because, in some sense, these products are on the market, and not very many of them, and we wanted to know, so will the consumer choose these products, and why will they do that? We had a look at the data when we finished, and there's one theory that actually explained what was happening in acceptance, and that was the expectancy value theory. And it says that the individual will accept when they've had an experience with the product. It can be direct or indirect, and I'll explain this to you. That changes their belief, that changes the attitude, and then they might veer into the acceptance or non-acceptance of the product. And we posed the following to them: goat's milk. If you had the goat's milk, tell us about it. If you have never had any goat's milk or come in contact with it, tell us if you'll accept that product as a possible choice. Will you try it? And it was interesting that from our study, the direct experiences can be categorized. You have the consumer group that has causal factors. They had to use it because of health. Goat's milk, some of the moms would say, I had to use it for my children. Lactose intolerance and all those kinds of things were mentioned. So causal factors has forced them. They haven't had a choice really, but they had to go for these options. And then there might be a free, willing lifestyle change that has forced them to consider these products, and they're using them. Then we had the consumer group that would say, oh yes, I'll try it if the price is right and if the taste is good. That's the conditional willingness group. Then we had those who were very familiar with it, and they had positive and negative experiences. They would give you the kind of internal factors around those products. They will tell you how it tasted, they will tell you how thick it was or how thin it was, or the elements that they could experience in it. Or they would tell you about the external product qualities, like the price, the packaging, those kinds of things. And they were very familiar and exactly knew that product from top to bottom. Then we had the group that was falling in the indirect experiences. They grew up with these products. They knew them from tiny babies, but they might not be using them now, because their circumstances have changed. And they would tell you, yes, I grew up with this, I know it so well. We used to do this, that, and the next, and then my mum would make this and that, and we will have that as a family. So they had memories, and this is where the indirect experience comes from. They had the memories of those products. But the loveliest group we identified within those consumers were those with the associations. They've never tried it. They've never been confronted with it. So what did they make of that word, goat's milk? And they would say to me, you know, goats smell, so that milk must smell, and I'm not going to try it. Now these kinds of, and that was not the only association. And this made me a concern, because if consumers are making these deductions without any experiences, it's damaging. And they do that with a lot. It doesn't just necessarily mean for goat's milk. Camel milk the same, and all the other products. And I think we don't want to over-inform our consumers, because there's always too much information. But it rings alarm bells that we've got to, there's some notion of what the consumer is making in their minds of products on the market, and that's stopping them from the truth and trying to purchase those elements, even if we say they are so good. So we've got to keep that balance and know that there is a consumer group that makes wild accusations to products out there and give attributes, the health hallows and the health horns, to products that don't deserve possibly those connotations. My last question is, can we predict behavior? As I said and I alluded to, I'm very scared to say that we can. We can give you an indication of what the intention of behavior of a consumer might be. But to guarantee that they will exactly do this is very, very risky, because the consumer is influenced daily by so many factors in their little environment, and they vary. One day it's money, the next morning it's mood, the next morning it's possibly something else, but you can never say what would really, or pin it down to say 100% they will go for this. You can go on majority feel or an indication of positivity from the consumer. And that brings me almost to my last idea around consumers' healthy choice and healthy food options. We can put it out there for the consumer, but this consumer still has to make that choice. And that's where our problem is. So what are they going to choose? And I'm concluding by saying a lot of things on my slide. it might be very challenging to come through with the health message because of the complexity of the consumer and the complexity within their environment. We can't separate certain things from the consumer. There are various factors that influence a consumer's choice and selection every day. And one of the things that I would like to ride home with is the fact that we've got to consider changing that environment in which the consumer is functioning, and maybe the nudging effects that we can prompt the consumer with can bring that home, that message of healthy food choices and why am I doing this and what does it mean to me in the long run. And yes, I believe consumer behavior is there to assist us to identify where the consumer would like to have these nudges and how they would like to implement these nudges. And lastly, this explains my situation. I think many marketers or companies are faced with this. They think they know their consumer, and suddenly this consumer has switched on them and now doesn't know where their brand is and they're considered loyal. So thank you very much.